Welcome to the HIT Podcast, H.I.T, Human Resources, Insurance, and Technology. I'm your host, Toby Kennedy. As we do every week, we are dropping into your feed with what we hope are bite-sized, digestible, well-curated conversations going on in the space. This week's episode will be no exception. This week's episode is brought to you by Montage Insurance Solutions, and we're going to pick up where we left off. I was fortunate enough to do the Keynote main stage here at the CAHR. We are live from the floor. If you missed last week, go back and check last week's episode. It was part one of my talk. We're going to pick up where we left off with part two of my talk from the main stage here at the CAHR. But the cost of healthcare is up and rising, and therefore we need to look at some of this stuff. We need to be open, like the newspaper story tells us, to seeing, well, I think I've got the right mousetrap, or I think I've got my head wrapped around this stuff, but let's talk about this. Let's look at this. And when we talk about how the MERP a minute ago gets into who owns claims liability, you start getting into concepts of claims liability, you start getting into conversations about self-funding. And I'll tell you why. If you break down your fully insured costs, you've got your claims, your insurance company profit, taxes, and admin costs. On the self-insured side, you've still got the claims, but you've got your potential to get some money back. You've still got taxes, but they're lower, by the way, because you're not spending taxes on the entire premium, right? You don't have to pay taxes on your claims, and you've got your admin and fixed costs. So some of this stuff here might be locked off, and it's not necessarily what we're here to talk about today, certainly not in kind of this basic overview. But when we look at claims, in the self-insured world, if we can put some downward pressure on those claims and maybe get them down a bit to here, then you look to see, hey, in the fully insured space, I hope you're on Anthem's Christmas card list or United Healthcare's Christmas card list, because all we did was get them bigger profit. But in the self-funded world, that's our opportunity for surplus returns. So that's where, hey, we set aside this money, it never went out the door. We were able to put downward pressure on those claims. So when we look at how our costs break down in either of these, this is why it starts to make some sense sometimes. And you don't need to self-fund the whole kit and caboodle, right? Maybe we've got Kaiser and we're upside down on our Kaiser participation, so we're having more and more trouble finding a non-Kaiser carrier, right? We want to look at some of this stuff, who knows? But lots of different reasons why we start to look at this, and we kind of tease out that box of risk, where when we look to see what was my risk, what am I giving to an insurance company, what are they pricing me for that vehicle to take this stuff on, and how can we maybe be more thoughtful about what we put into that box. One easy and quick and frequent foray into self-insuring is level funded. Level funded is a product that works really well, especially if you're one of those small group fully insured employers in the state of California that goes up to 100 employees, plagued by the kind of age banding nature of the products. You know, same exact plan for different people costs different amounts because each employee, each spouse, each child needs to be age underwritten. Level fund is not like that. One cost for employee only, one cost for employee plus spouse, one cost for employee plus child and family, et cetera. So what they do is, it's a self-insured product where they say, hey, listen, rather than billing you the irregular intervals of claims, we're going to estimate what you think for what we think you need for the whole year's worth of claims. We're going to divide that by 12. We're going to bill you that every month. So the only way your bill will fluctuate on the monthly basis is if your enrollment fluctuates. Other than that, we keep it the same. So it's a self-insured plan that bills like a fully insured plan, and when we get to the end of the year, if they billed us too much and we didn't have that much in claims, we get that claims funding returned to us. Different contracts, maybe 50, 75, sometimes 100%, but if they didn't set aside enough and we had more claims, there is no true-up. They don't look back and true-up. So that's the nice part about a level funded plan, is we can foray into self-funding in a way that we're going to have flat, fixed level monthly costs. We're going to get to the end of the year with no negative true-up. We might get some money back. So if I look at this and I'm setting it beside a fully insured quote and they both look kind of similar, the fully insured money is just going out the door. The level funded, at least I got the option to maybe get some surplus returns if we can put downward pressure on our claims. And that's where we get into some strategies for doing that. and getting some of that money back, okay? The kind of next step along the, hey, I want to explore maybe taking on more and more risk is we can look to say, all right, well then let's get the surplus return, let's get 100% of those. Let's go self-funding, but we can do it maybe ASO, administrative services only. So we're still really partnered with the carrier for a lot of our interactions. So there's probably still some VIG in there that we might be able to put some downward pressure on, but hey, now, just like in the level funded world, the self-insured world, at the very least we have transparency. We have claims data, which is probably one of the biggest hurdles in the fully insured space is you just get told, hey, here's your increase. And you're like, is it? Like, yeah, your claims ran high. And you're like, did they? I have no idea. I don't know what my claims are. So at least in the self-insured world, and this is how we start to put downward pressure on these claims, we can look at them. We can see them. We can get targeted on this. And maybe we go beyond the ASO and we just blow the whole thing up. We completely unbundle everything. We're like, hey, listen, we'll work with the broker consultant. We'll find a TPA and we'll reassemble the whole mousetrap. Because this is our opportunity with some of the visibility into our claims to really look and see, hey, if we tease it all apart, how do we put it back together so that ultimately we are extremely thoughtful about what risk we're holding, what risk we're going to pay some premium on, because when we're paying that, again, there's that VIG beyond what's likely to happen. And we're going to add our zeros and double zeros to this roulette wheel so that over time, on average, we're definitely winning. When we get into the self-funding world, the first thing I need to talk about is stop-loss insurance, which comes in two flavors, individual and aggregate. The individual stop-loss is you saying, hey, listen, I will own my claims. I will take that risk on, but only so far as any one individual claimant hits a certain threshold. Maybe that's 75,000, 100,000, something like that. The aggregate says, all right, now we've got protection against any one individual claimant getting too hot. We also want to buy protection against the whole group getting too high. It's typically expressed in terms of a percentage. So you say, hey, look, we expect claims to be at 100% of what we expect. We expect this is 100% of it. If it hits 110, 115, 120 type of a thing, now the aggregate insurance will perform. And the stop loss is not just there to protect you against high claimants, it's also there from a cash flow standpoint, right? So if we can get thoughtful about some of the contract wording, things like advanced funding, aggregate accommodation, help pay out smoother monthly costs to us. So from a cash flow standpoint, we can start to work to level some of this stuff out so we're not just paying out in widely irregular intervals. Also leave the actuarial box on here as far as things that we might want to look at and take some control over on the broker consulting side. Hopefully, we can look at some of this stuff because when we're talking about things like individual deductibles, this is a mathematical equation, right? How are we arriving at the individual stop loss amount, the 75,000 or the 100,000? Because if we just leave it up to the carrier maybe to pick a number, do their incentives align with us? Do they want us to win as bad as we want to win? But if we buy a stop-loss deductible on the individual side that's too low, we're overpaying for risk we don't have. If we buy one that's too high, we're exposing ourselves to unnecessary risk. So the level isn't just what did we do last year or what's a rule of thumb, because maybe that ignores some of our own specific risk and claims. It's an actuarial equation, right? So I just kind of wanted to touch on some of those things as we get through what really unbundling some of this stuff can look like. And we talk about how much risk we either take on or don't take on. Ultimately, if we're looking to take on claims liability, because we've decided that the way that the insurer is going to price us, regardless of how we do it, regardless of any of the strategies we've just touched upon and introduced, we want to put downward pressure on our claims. We want to look and say, hey, what's our medical claims? What are they? And how can we sort of adjust those? How can we add zeros and double zeros to the roulette wheel of our claims? And one big, important, sort of smart thing you want to look at, what they call point solutions, right? So point solutions are a vendor that you introduce to your ecosystem for a very specific type of claim. Okay, I'll give you a couple of examples. You'll obviously want to look at your own claims data, which again, hey, good news on the self-insured world. I've got more information, but guys like diabetes management or MSK, musculoskeletal point solution vendors come in to say, hey, look, on the MSK side, for example, someone like Hinge, for example, says, look, your MSK claims, your musculoskeletal claims, on average, are 10 to 15% of your total healthcare costs. We can come into the equation, we Hinge, for example, and lower that by 20, 30, 40% or more. So if I can take something that's 15% of my total healthcare spend and lower that by a third, I'm shaving 5 points off my overall benefits cost. And if our benefits are getting up $5, $10 million, and every point is a $100,000 swing, the $500,000 swing is kind of important to have this conversation, right? And so someone that comes in and says, look, from a point solution standpoint, the Hinges of the world, it's like, hey, listen, let's see if we can get some of these surgeries off your plan. Let's get people into PT and rehab, right? I tore my own ACL not too long ago, and I thought I might need surgery. The doctor I met with had me go to rehab first. Went through the rehab, leg's fine. Didn't need the surgery, right? So A, didn't expose myself or my plan to the expense of surgery or the risk of infection or the risk of resurgery or any of these types of things, right? So when we can put downward pressure on our claims in thoughtful ways, it's helpful. And it turns out the single biggest contributor to the cost of healthcare is the doctor we see in the first place. So this idea of steerage or helping my employees pick one provider over another is probably the single most impactful way that we can put some downward pressure on our claims, and we can do it through a number of different ways. Things like disappearing deductibles. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Employee, our plan design has a $1,000 deductible, but only if you see this provider for this reason. If you go to this provider over here, your deductible's totally waived. So it helps us move employees to one provider or another, and it's not about sending them to cheaper doctors. It's about higher performing doctors. And I'll give you the example of someone like Gartner. Gartner's a point solution, so we can do this steerage through plan design. We can do it through a point solution vendor. Gartner is fascinating. It's fundamentally it's a data company, right? And we live in a time in 2025 where the providers and the hospitals are required by law to publish their data and publish it in machine-readable files. And that comes together with AI. AI's whole thing is, I can ingest big data and do something with it. So now we live in a world where we can look and we can see, for example, does this doctor at the same hospital, I'm not going to pick on any hospital because it's true of all of them, the same hospital, this doctor has a 4% infection rate after surgery. This doctor has a 40% infection rate surgery. How would I have possibly known that prior to getting access to some of this information? But can we, as plan sponsors, start to introduce tools that steer our employees to more effective places of care because it has the single most meaningful impact on our plan design? Or can we even do it with products? Okay, so shout out to Surest from the guys at United Healthcare, which was the folks that originally actually designed the high deductible health plan. They got back together and they're like, hey, look, we thought we sort of hit a home run with the HSA, but here's the new idea. We're going to scrap deductibles entirely, too confusing for employees. We're going to scrap co-insurance entirely, too confusing for employees. And we're just going to do copays. But the copays are going to be dynamic copays. So when I saw their app, I look at my phone, it looked kind of like an Uber, where like you go to call the Uber and you can see where all the different cars are and where they're circling. You can see all the different providers that are in network and accepting patients, except this one's $5, this one's $50, this one's $75, this one's $10. Okay, so Mr. and Mrs. Employee, see whatever doctor you want. Maybe you go to church with a guy or golf with a guy, fine. But FYI, we are trying to steer you to some of these higher performing doctors, and we'll do it perhaps in the Surest example with dynamic copays. So lots of different ways where we can steer employees to one provider or another, but to punctuate ways in which we put downward pressure on our claims if we choose to own those claims, because we look back at the way the insurance companies charge, because it's just a fundamental concept of insurance. and we don't want to just hand that money over. We want to be more thoughtful about it. Well, hey, let's put some downward pressure. Let's look at point solutions. Let's look at steerage. That's all the time we have on this week's episode. Keeping to our commitment to keep this bite-sized and digestible, we are breaking the 60-minute talk into 3 parts. Join us next week for the conclusion, part 3 of the talk from the main stage. Thank you to our sponsors, Rula, TrueHue, Excel Health, Montage Insurance Solutions. Thank you to you guys for watching. Blessed to be here. Appreciate you guys. Join us next week. Join us every week. And until next week, make this the best week yet.